Okay, so today's lesson from our grades project is mode, and mode is the most challenging of the methods that I asked you to try to write. So what the mode is it's the score that occurs most often, or it could be the scores that occur most often. It's possible that in this example, 60 could occur 3 times, and 62 may occur 3 times. Here you can see it's 4. And if nothing occurs more than 3 times, then we have a double mode or a multiple mode. We would have 60 and 62. So to start out, I don't want to worry about multiple modes at all. I just want to try and come up with how many, a method of returning a mode, a single mode, for a set of scores. So in our project, it talks about if there is no mode, meaning no score occurs more than once, then we'll just return a -1, and that will be the indication that there is no mode. If there is a mode, or if there's multiple modes, we'll just return one value as being the mode. So to do this, my suggestion is to first sort the array. So you can see the example I wrote is sorted, and we're just looking at a section of it in the middle. I'd like to start with trying to count as we go. So we need to go through the whole array from position 0 through the last position, which is position length -1, and count how many times something repeats. So I'm going to start count off at 1. So if the very first value in the array is, let's say it's 2, and we look at that, well, 2 has occurred 1 time, so I start count at 1. If the second value is also a 2, then I would increment count. If the second value is also the same as the previous value, I would increment count by 1. So we need a way of accessing values in the array. So let's suppose that I is our counter, and we're going to start I at a 0 and allow it to go through to the end of the array. So in our example here, I is presently a 60, and 60 has occurred 1 time, so we would set count to 1. And the most, to start with, the most that I'm sorry, I didn't mean to put a 0 there, I meant to put a -1 there. Most is going to be the variable we'll use to return as being the mode. So right now our mode is -1 in the case where we haven't found anything repeat. Let's suppose 60 is the first time something repeats. So how do we check to see if something repeats? Well, if, as we're going through this loop and I is changing, if I want to look at the actual value. So if scores sub I equals scores sub I plus 1, that would be the case where we have a repetition. So if that happens, we would want to take count and increment it. So if that doesn't happen, we would want to take count and set it back to 1. Prior to doing that, we need to see if count became the biggest so far. So I need another variable. I have count to represent counting as we go, and adding 1 if there's a repetition. I need another variable. I'm going to call it high count. So high count would start at 1, just like count starts at 1. And then if these are not a match, that would mean that we got to a situation like from here to here, where 60 became a 61, and they're not a match. Well, at that point, we need to look at how many 60s were there. Well, that would be count at that point. So, in this scenario here, in this situation, I don't want to set count back to 1 yet to start counting again. I need to check to see if count is greater than high count. And if count is greater than high count, then we need to change our high count. Then high count becomes count. So our high count was originally a 1. As we move along here, as I moves along, I and I plus score sub I and score sub I and score sub I plus 1 are the same. So here we're checking to see if they're the same. So when I is here, score sub I and score sub I plus 1 are the same. So we would add 1 to count. And then I moves up in our loop, and scores sub I and scores sub I plus 1 again are the same. So we would add another 1 to count. And then here they're not the same. So count would have become a 3. 1, 2, and a 3. And once they're not the same, we need to check to see if the count is greater than high count, which it is. And we would let high count become the count itself. And then we would set count back to 1 to start counting again the next set of values. So this is the process. So let's go over this again. As we look at 60 and then another 60 and another 60, you would continue to increment count. And this would become a 2 and then become a 3. And at this point, when we look from 60 to 61, as we look from here to here, we notice that they're not the same. So the else would be executed. And in our else, if the count's greater than high count, which it is, 3 is greater than 1, high count becomes count. So our high count so far is a 3. We have one more problem. Once we found that high count is a 3 and is greater than, the count was greater than what high count was before, we not only need to change high count to be count, but we need to change most to become the new score. Remember, originally we set most to be -1. Now we need most to become scores sub. Well, where are we? We're right here checking the one ahead. So scores sub I will do it for us. We're right here at this point, and we're checking against the one ahead of it. So scores sub I is the score that we've been counting. So most will become scores sub I. And most will be the value that we'll return once we've gone through the entire array. So this occurs, these two occur if they're not the same. If they're not the same, we do all this. But if count is greater than high count, we need to do both of these. We need to set high count to count, and we need to set most to scores sub I. In either case, as long as the scores are not the same, we're transitioning In our example from 60 to 61, then we need to make count, set count back to 1 so that we can then continue as we go through to find the largest one. And at the end, we'll return when we're finished with the loop. So we need let me extend the page a second so I can have room to do a little more. So this is in a loop. We can do a for loop that takes care of checking every score I against it, the one next to it scores some I plus 1. And when that loop ends, we're going to return the value that we call most. And most, if there were never any duplicates, most would be a -1, which we initially set it to. And if there are any duplicates, we count them. And iCount keeps track of the highest count so far. And at the end, the score that occurred most often is the score we want to return. We don't want to return 3 or 5 or 9 if that's how many times it occurred. We want to return the score that occurred most often. So that's the lesson for today on mode. Not an easy task, but I'm pretty sure you can do this. Good luck. See you next time.